pleasure to welcome you once again to the second day of the world's largest Fintech Fest, Global Fintech Fest. This event is organized by Fintech Convergence Council and Payments Council of India and Internet and Mobile Association of India. The fest is presented by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, Reserve Bank of India, and supported by Niti Aayog, Startup Invest India, and is powered by Razorpay, brought to you by Amazon Pay and WhatsApp, in association with partner Google Pay and Open Financial Technologies and digital payments partner Cash-Free Payments. This session is a workshop on startup ecosystem development in 2021, a new normal. Without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed speaker we have with us today, Mr. Pranav Arya, Senior Consultant, Startup Genome.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope you're all enjoying the great events that are taking place at the Global FinTech Forum 2021. My name is Pranav Arya, Senior Consultant of Startup Ecosystem Development at Startup Genome. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the development of startup ecosystems in the new normal. And I hope that after the session, you'll have a better understanding of how the world's startup economy has evolved over the last year. The last year was ending the pandemic. The startup community from across the world showcased their concern for the critical sector of the economy. With mass fears of a pandemic-induced recession, everyone, from founders to investors to government leaders, worried about how startups are going to be able to keep the lights on. Ultimately, however, it was the broader startup economy that thrived as we entered a new chapter of digitization, with startups playing a critical role. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how startup ecosystems across the world fared during this precarious time. From 2018 to the first half of 2020, we, as the global startup community, created $3.8 trillion in ecosystem value, which refers to the sum total of startup valuations and exits during this period. This value is greater than the GDP of most G7 economies, and thus the value of the global startup economy cannot be ignored as far as the bigger, broader global economy is concerned. Today, I want to talk to you about three main things. I want to take a few minutes to talk about who we are and what we aim to achieve through our efforts at Startup Genome. I want to talk about the key findings and regional trends from our Global Startup Ecosystem Report, or the GSER for short. This refers to Startup Genome's annual publication of the world's most widely read body of research on startup ecosystems, covering regions from across the globe. And last but not least, I want to talk about how subsectors have evolved in the startup economy over the last year, along with what we can expect going forward. Well, we know that the global startup revolution has never been stronger than it is today. We see that the value creation from the global startup economy remains heavily concentrated in the top 10 cities. Even today, the San Franciscos, New Yorks, Londons, Beijings, Bostons, and Tel Avivs of the world continue to control the massive share of value that is generated in the startup economy. On the y-axis, you have exit value, which is a proxy for value creation. And on the x-axis, you have all the different ecosystems. And you see that the top 100 cities across the world really sit on the flattest, most superimposed part of the x-axis, showing that they create very little value as compared to these top 10 economies. And while I'm pleased to say that the concentration of this value has gone down significantly from 87% in 2011 to 2012 to 63%, we see that this value still remains heavily concentrated today. So there is much more progress to be made as far as the democratization of the startup revolution is concerned. At Startup Genome, our mission really is to flatten this curve. We've helped and learned from over 100 governments and policymakers in the last 3 years to understand the critical challenges and opportunities that need to be prioritized within a startup ecosystem to accelerate its development. We've worked with basically governments from every single region and with ecosystems of all shapes and sizes to understand what it is that startup ecosystems need the most at their particular stage of development and with their own defining characteristics. The way we do this is by focusing on primary and secondary research to look under the hood and get a deeper understanding of the fundamental characteristics of a startup ecosystem. By doing this, we're able to map the biggest issues facing startups in a particular ecosystem and identify key policy actions that are suitable for the stage and phase of that ecosystem. We're very data-driven, so we don't like to operate with intuition, but with quantified data and benchmarks that will help policymakers understand where their strengths and gaps are. Furthermore, through our Global Startup Ecosystem Report, or the GSER, we help ecosystem builders get the word out there about all the great things that are happening in their ecosystem to the global startup community. Often, promising local initiatives are overlooked and never fully utilized because their knowledge does not make it to the broader global startup community, and the GSER helps to change this. Through the GSER, we aim to inform you about all the ongoings of what's happening in startup ecosystems across the world. If you're interested in getting your ecosystem out there, please do reach out to me. My email address will be provided at the end of this presentation. Next, I would like to talk about the key findings and regional trends we've learned from this year's version of the Global Startup Ecosystem Report, or the GSER. You can access this report at startupgenome.com/report/GSER 2021. And this year, we've expanded our regional focus and done rankings by continent, and even increased coverage of regions in LATAM and Africa. We've also created and curated a lot more content for the startup community that we believe will be very interesting for you to read. So I urge you to download your free copy today. Globally, what we've seen is that venture capital investment has increased considerably over the years, going up 95% from 2016 to 2020. And this growth has been seen across different regions of the world, and it's no longer just concentrated to just a few places. Additionally, we've seen more and more ecosystems create their first billion-dollar club startups. Billion-dollar club startups refer to unicorns or exits that have taken place with valuations over $1 billion. And while earlier they were heavily concentrated to about 10 to 15 in 2013, to now 91 ecosystems producing at least $1 billion club startup, which we think is an incredible development and really showcases that value creation in ecosystems is on the rise. Every year, we rank the top 20 startup ecosystems across the world based on a variety of different factors. So the usual suspects, such as funding and exits, but also factors in the traditional innovation ecosystem that power the startup ecosystem, including the quality of universities, the level and quality of knowledge and patent creation that takes place in these ecosystems, and many others. And what we found this year is that while Silicon Valley, London, New York, Beijing, Boston, LA, and Tel Aviv, Jerusalem continue to be the top ecosystems across the world, we've seen considerable new rises in this top 20 ranking. So Tokyo has made an impressive 6 jumps in the rank to rank 9, and Toronto, Waterloo, and Seoul have also jumped an impressive 4 ranks this year to be in the top 20. North America continues to dominate these global rankings with over 50% of the world's globally leading ecosystem in the top 20. However, we also see a considerable rise in the contribution of Asian startup ecosystems within this list of global top 20 ecosystems. Asia has also contributed more than 50% to global exits in the first half of 2021 alone, really underscoring the rise of Asia over the last few years. We also rank emerging ecosystems in our methodology, and we create a specific methodology designed to evaluate nascent startup ecosystems. This year, we've seen that Mumbai, just as last year, continues to be the top ranked emerging ecosystem across the world, with new entrants such as Copenhagen, Wuxi, Miami, Brussels, and Houston debuting in the top 20 emerging startup ecosystems. I'd like to now take a minute to get to the regional insights that we've seen from our GSCR 2021. Starting with Africa, we've seen that Africa has also seen an impressive rise over the years. The region has created over $6.6 billion in ecosystem value, with $6 billion coming from the top 5 startup ecosystems in the region. Interestingly, fintech dominates the early stage investments in the region today, totaling over $206 million in early stage investments. The top ecosystems in the region are Cape Town, Lagos, Johannesburg, Nairobi, and Accra. Within Asia, we see that it continues to grow with impressive momentum. As I described earlier, Tokyo and Seoul have grown considerably in the rankings in 2021. The whole region has created $1.1 trillion of ecosystem value in the last 30-month period from 2018 to the first half of 2020, which refers to about 30% of the world's ecosystem value creation, an impressive rise from earlier. The top performers in the region are Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore. Within Europe, we see that Europe continues to grow at a steady pace. The number of billion-dollar exits in the region tripled from 3 to 9 in the last measured period. On average, a European ecosystem has an ecosystem value of $6.3 billion, which is the second highest average ecosystem value after North America. The leading ecosystems in the region are London, Paris, Amsterdam, Stockholm, and Berlin. Within MENA, we see that late-stage funding in both volume and value has doubled over the last 5 years, which indicates a much higher rate of scale-up creation in the region. The leading sector in MENA is artificial intelligence and big data, with over $3 billion invested in early-stage rounds and $8 billion in exit value from 2018 to the first half of 2020. The leaders in the region are Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Dubai, Cairo, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi. North America continues in its global leadership and has contributed more than 50% of total ecosystem value of the entire world for the second year in a row. The region produced 60% of the world's unicorns in 2020, and 9 out of the world's top 20 ecosystems are from the region. The leaders are, unsurprisingly, Silicon Valley, New York City, Boston, LA, and Seattle. Within Oceania, we see that from 2018 to H1 2020, there were over $2 billion of investments pouring in the form of early stage funding. Ecosystems in the region have created over $30 billion of ecosystem value. However, it is to be noted that this remains heavily concentrated in the ecosystems of Sydney, Melbourne, and New Zealand. The leaders in this region are Sydney, Melbourne, New Zealand, Brisbane, and Perth. Within LATAM, we've seen that the volume of early stage funding in the ecosystem has nearly doubled, whereas later stage funding has gone up a whopping 5 times over this period. The hottest emerging sector in the region is artificial intelligence and big data, with nearly $250 million in early stage funding going into the subsector. The leaders in the region are Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Bogota, Buenos Aires, and Santiago Valparaiso. Next, I would like to tell you about some of the subsector trends we've seen emerge in the global startup economy over the last year. We've mapped these trends by way of our global subsector lifecycle that aims to categorize each subsector into one of 3 phases: decline, which you see in pink, mature, which you see in yellow, and growth, which you see in turquoise. These have been mapped by 2 key variables. We have Series A growth over 5 years on the y-axis and exits growth on the x-axis. Series A growth on the y-axis is a leading indicator telling us of the trends to come, and exits growth on the x-axis is a lagging indicator that tells us about the past performance of that subsector culminating into an exit. Within these subsectors, we see that artificial intelligence and big data advanced manufacturing and robotics, and blockchain are in the growth phase, seeing the highest amount of growth across all the other subsectors. Interestingly, fintech, which was farther behind in the mature phase in 2019, has seen a resurgence in Series A funding that is bringing it closer to the top and is almost approaching the growth phase itself. This resurgence in Series A funding by fintech really is indicative of the innovation that is taking place in the subsector. When we map VC investments in fintech, we see that it has grown considerably over the last 5 years. Despite being a mature subsector where we've seen a lot of development already take place, we've seen a compounded annual growth rate of 16% in terms of rise of VC investments in the fintech space from 2016 to 2020. Now, what's behind this growth? And how do we feel about fintech going forward? Well, I believe that there are 3 key trends that will propel the fintech subsector for the years to come. The first one is the growth of mobile. And while it may seem like old news to most of urban India now, across the world, many people continue to make their first financial transactions on their cell phones. This trend has accelerated considerably with COVID. And even in the United States, a developed economy, we've seen a considerable rise in the proximity-based mobile payments field, both in terms of value and volume since the pandemic. Secondly, in addition to the growth of already older fintech verticals that we just talked about, we're seeing a rise of new fintech verticals in the space that is propelling growth. These include things like autonomous finance and decentralized finance that have seen a lot more venture capital interest over the last year. And last but not least, we see that both governments and financial institutions are instituting public and private policy that are driving fintech startups. Regulations and guidelines such as open banking and the PSD2 directive have been seen more positively by the broader community. Even in places where these are not mandated, banks are actively creating their own guidelines to stay competitive and innovative, accelerating growth prospects for fintechs across the world. With these 3 trends and more, we believe that fintech will have a good decade to come. I hope that was very insightful for you and that you got to learn more about the global startup economy and what has transpired over the last year. For any questions, please feel free to contact me at pranav@startupgenome.com. Please enjoy the Global FinTech Forum 2021, and I'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arya, for such an engaging workshop, and a special thanks to all our delegates for being and attending this session. Thank you, and please stay back for the next session coming up. Thank you all. Thank you.